My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, join us knee-deep in the dead as we enter the Flayed Domain.
Our first segment is the basic crawl. The Flayed Domain is a 13-page introductory adventure included in Slipgate Choke Point, the Stay Frosty supplement inspired by Doom, Quake, and other terribly violent computer games. It was written by Andrew Walter and Paul Cronin, illustrated by Andrew Walter and Ambika Kirkland. From the text. A contingent of rangers specializing in teleportation technology has not returned through the Slipgate after their rune-finding excursion. Their research points to a source of malign power in the region, guarding a rune that transmits ether signals indicating an affinity to magics associated with matter displacement. The party must enter the Slipgate and recover the rune. As an additional objective, 3 of the scientists showed a certain psychic affinity. Should their brain matter fall into the claws of some of the more intelligent malignancies, it could be used as the basis to mount an Earth-side psychic assault. Whenever possible, the Rangers should recover the brains of these 3 scientists.
That is the initial briefing, and from there we go on into the contents of the scenario. That briefing is the first bit, and it is followed by an explanation of the map icons that appear on the 8-bit spritey maps for each room, a list of bonus XP to be handed out for specific achievements, and of course to create a nice sense of rivalry between all the PCs, and the all-important Wandering Hostiles table. The next page is a schematic point crawl map that is a kind of network diagram of all the locations in the scenario. And then we get a room-by-room write-up of each place, each accompanied by a 1990s video game style map. First we have the Slipgate entrance and chapel. That is followed by the acid vats. Then the ruined void, which is a freezing black void of emptiness, in which float some chunks of masonry. There's also the broken teleport center, a network of flooded tunnels, the alarmingly titled corpse grinding facility, the ceremonial room, and finally, crucially, the Death Lord's lair.
So, Tom, I've only read this. What about you?
I played this as a Slipgate Choke Point one-shot of about 3 hours, maybe slightly over, with 4 players. So I think almost exactly as intended, basically. Perhaps unusually for this podcast.
Indeed. Let's talk about things we liked about the Flayed Domain. I always like to kick off with visuals and presentational things. I actually think the illustrations detract slightly here. They're really good individually, but I think that they take away from the aesthetic a little bit, in my opinion, which we'll get to in a bit. I have to say, though, I really do like the illustration of the Death Lord.
Yes,
the Death Lord is great.
That's incredible. Yeah, he's a sort of bullheaded.
That was incredible. Guy, yeah. To be completely fair, this module exists inside a bigger text, and in the context of the bigger text, I think the illustrations make more sense, pencil illustrations. But they did such a good job selling the video game bit that part of it took me out of it just a smidge.
Yeah, I think you're right, because maybe the vibe of the rest of the Slipgate Choke Point book that it's in is those sketches which are like the concept drawings you sometimes see in video game manuals.
Right.
And then the scenario is the game itself. And so by letting one slip into the other, it's good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Mm.
Yeah, but that said, and it's a nice segue, I really admire how much they commit to the bit here.
Yeah.
Everything is so video gamey. These are the video games I came up with. This is very much my era. Basically like late middle school, high school, early college years. The maps, the fonts, there's like mini boss and boss encounters. Oh my goodness. There's a moment where the boss draws a symbol in the air and then some laser darts fire at you. That is the most video game boss fight thing I've ever seen depicted in a module, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The whole, like, this is a video game thing, they really sell it.
Yeah. It's really both in-universe and transparent, like, like color-coded weapons being hidden behind other color-coded force fields and this kind of thing. But it is. It's a great fight. It's weird, isn't it? Like 90s FPS games is one of those obvious in hindsight, why isn't this already a game thing? Listeners, please write in with your list of already existing games of that kind. But this seems like, it's really good. They really stick to it. They've thought through, obviously, we're not really here to talk about the mechanics part, but there's loads of stuff in the game itself that harkens back to those games, but tries to make them work for a group instead of a single protagonist, which is what you need to do to make this work. I think it's admirable how much they commit to it. And they've also done a great job of taking that aesthetic and the themes of it as well. So, all this, it's not exactly body horror, actually, is it? It's just sort of lots of dead bodies, usually. Zombies and horrible demons. Putting that on top of the kind of mission structure that is more familiar from role-playing games, specifically from Stay Frosty, but I think from adventure games in general. So they haven't tried to make it 90s FPS game, the tabletop game, because I don't think that would work very well. But instead, they've done this really good job of making sure that the vibe of one thing is working in a different format. I've sort of lost the run of myself here, but you know what I mean, right? It's sort of not sticking too closely to the original thing.
I think what makes it work is how almost like kitsch the whole thing is. Yeah. This is a bit of a digression, but when I think about adaptations from video games to role-playing games, they are almost always bad, in my opinion. And the reason why they're bad is because the person adapting it to the role-playing game typically seems to, I don't know, like they misunderstand what made the video game cool, and then they further misunderstand what the role-playing game medium brings
exactly.
to it.
What RPG is good at, what was good about that thing, yeah.
We went through that run of Dark Souls and Elden Ring inspired role-playing games, and 99% of them were so bad. And it's because they misunderstood those two elements. They misunderstood what was truly going on in Dark Souls and Elden Ring, which is it's not just boss fights and dying and coming back over and over. It's something else going on related to exploration and lore. They misunderstood that part of it, and then they also misunderstand what role-playing games can do. And so what I think makes this work is the fact that it's just so unabashedly camp and over the top. And it says, look, this is the pure aesthetic, right? It's pure video game aesthetic. And I think it works. I don't know how long you could maintain this.
Well, that's in my questions like later. We'll come back to that. But you're right.
I admire it up to this point, though.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of places where I remember first reading that description of the weird alien dark chapel that you first start in. There's a lot of places where people would soft pedal that, not go for the full heavy metal, ridiculous brain matter everywhere, things smashed into other things. That's not a problem for Andrew and Paul, apparently. They just went fully all in on it. And more power to them for that. Speaking of which, let's talk maybe about some of the specific things that are in the module. Do you have like a favorite room or a favorite thing that's in this?
Well, I would say that probably it's that recording. There's this moment in the beginning of the module when the characters get this classic last recording of the previous group that was here. And we see this fuzzy video recording, and they're trying to warn anybody who comes what to expect. And then it's suddenly cut off. And the reason why it's suddenly cut off is because the person gets ripped apart by an invisible force. Just a really, really great moment. It's so cinematic. Quite loved that. There's also just a lot of fun rooms. I happen to think the Void Room, I think the Void Room is my favorite.
Yeah, the Void Room is good. Sadly, our group didn't go there, so I didn't really know. Because to explain this, there's these sort of floating platforms, and I think if they get overloaded, they start to crumble into the void, and you've basically got to jump across space.
Precisely
to get to the other
six
side.
people can hop on each chunk of thing, which is so video gamey.
Yeah.
They collapse after 6 people have touched it. I like the Void Room because it's in my top 5 favorite fantasy science fiction-y game tropes. You're like in corridors, and then you open a door, and suddenly there's a weird rift in time space.
Yeah.
There's inky blackness and little islands of stuff to hop on, and then at the very far end is the treasure. I love it. It's way up there with underground lakes and grotty old kings on thrones. It's like my things I really love in games. And so, I really, really love that. What about you? What were some of your favorite moments?
Yeah, I think the Void Room is great because I think it's important to have that kind of weird space in it to kind of separate this from the more traditional Alien style Space Marines in Trouble, which is your sort of standard Stay Frosty adventure. Although speaking of that, Broken Teleport Center, which I think is where you can see that message. That's a classic situation in an Alien-style movie. Should we try and fix the teleport thing? Is it worth... do we have to send someone out to get parts by themselves? Good dilemma. Yeah. Flooded tunnels, literally in Aliens, now that I think about it. And also, speaking of dilemmas, the ceremonial room is basically a wizard's library, okay? You go in, there's a black pentagram on the floor, there's some super weapon... Is it the super nail gun? Some ridiculous thing like that.
That's also very Doom, though, right? Like, that is very clearly calling to Doom.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's clearly a trap, right?
Right.
The treasure is bait, but it's also genuinely a useful treasure. So what are you going to do? I think 9 times out of 10, people are going to walk into the pentagram, set off the trap, and pick up the thing.
Oh, yeah.
But it's classic OSR, what do we do now stuff. It's not hiding anything from you. There's no gotcha here, except for the gotcha that you basically know is coming as soon as you step across those sinister candles. It's really nice. And I think, I should pull back from individual rooms and mention that I think I like how, especially in the early bits, the routes between the chambers are differentiated. Like one is covered in blood-stained planks, one is full of wires and things. So it's not telling you what's down each direction, but it is giving you a chance to make a slightly informed guess about what you might find.
I hadn't really
picked
up on that.
Yeah, and there's not only one way into the final room either. You've got 2 options. So if you sort of blow it, your attempt to go one way, you can try and go back through maybe a different route through the void chamber, that kind of thing. So it's nice, and it is pretty compact. It's meant to be an intro adventure, of course, but it gives you meaningful decisions to make, even though there are maybe not that many. Like, what is it, 8 rooms, 8, 9 things? Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Before we leave this segment, I do want to note that I think the writing is really good here. I don't want it to go unremarked upon.
Yeah.
It's very like 3 descriptive details style writing, but that's perfect for dungeon crawls. And I really liked it. There's just some really good text there. I was like, this is easy to overlook because you're so focused on the video game aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
But the writing is quite good.
That's true.
Okay, let's go to questions we had. Where shall we start?
We've already broached one of the questions, kind of, which is is kind of just fighting, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, next question. No, I think I did notice in play that characters establish themselves quite quickly. You just need one person to blow a couple of rolls and become the klutz of the group, and then this sort of dynamic will assert itself. And I suppose if you were to do a bunch of sessions, that would emerge more. And I have played in a multi-session Slipgate game. I don't know, what do you think? Is it a problem that it's just fighting, or is it just that's the thing you're doing,
Well, to be fair, it does have the fixing the teleporter part, and it does have what you just alluded to a little bit ago, this environmental exploration aspect of paying attention to the environment and seeing how that can inform your next decision. It is a lot of just shooting demons.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think it's fine. I think that the basic tension here, if it even is one, is what are we using this for? If this is just a one-off thing that you're doing in between sessions of your main game, this is perfect, right? It's perfect.
Yeah.
I'm guessing Stay Frosty characters are pretty easy to make, and you just dive in there and you just do the thing, you have a good time, you have a few laughs, and that's that. If you are trying to insert it into an ongoing science fiction game or like a Mothership type game or something like that, or just a bigger Stay Frosty campaign, I guess you have to think really hard about where does this fit, because it is so particular in its aesthetics and it's so almost gonzo in a way. I mean, just the names of things, right? Super nail gun and stuff like that. It may not fit in your broader setting. So that's a thing. But as far as like just it being a fighting thing, I think it just depends on what you're doing with it. I don't think you can sustain this for like 3 or 4 sessions, right? I think this is like 1 or 2 sessions.
Yeah, or I think maybe that would be probably a cap 2, maybe 3. I can't remember how long our thing was that we did. Right? Yeah. Well, that brings me to my next question, actually, if we can go to that, which is, there's no NPCs to talk to, except for that recording, which is a one-way conversation that's messily truncated, much like the... Anyway, do you think it would be worth establishing something like, for example, occasional crackly radio contact with someone in the base or something, just to give them another person to communicate with and maybe express their feelings about things? Or what do you reckon? Is that something that's really missing from this, or is it just...
I don't know. Again, I think it's a matter of scope. If you're doing this for 1 or 2 sessions and just as a one-off thing, I don't think you need that. But if you are trying to weave this into a bigger thing, then I think maybe that could be helpful. Yeah, that's kind of my non-answer.
Great.
That, I think.
Fair enough.
I got to the part near the beginning of the text where it mentions a danger die. And I realized, 1, I don't know what the danger die is. And 2, that's because I don't know much about Stay Frosty. I only know just the little bits that you've told me.
Sure.
That I've just gathered from our doing this series for going on 8 years now. What is Stay Frosty? Give us a little primer on Stay Frosty, Tom.
Sure. So Stay Frosty was written by Casey Garsky. It's a fairly compact game. It's based on the Black Hack. Although you're trying to roll high numbers instead of low numbers. That's the main difference, because Casey says he likes high numbers. It is a game of space marines in trouble, basically. So things like aliens, Starship Troopers, military sci-fi genre. He also mentions a bunch of things that I've never read or seen in the Appendix N, but those are the two main things I think about, Starship Troopers and aliens. And there's a bunch of like interesting things in like character creation and whatnot, which I won't go into here because it's a bit OSR inside baseball. And also you should probably buy the PDF. But the killer app of Stay Frosty is its point crawl mission structure, the danger die, and tension, which is a mostly group stat that you get, although if you split the party, it can be. A point crawl, which is explained in Stay Frosty as the basic form of a point crawl, is like a flow chart. So each node is a location, and the lines between them are possible paths. And then the danger die, I'll actually quote from the text here because that seems like the best thing to do. It says, Stay Frosty missions require a mechanism to ratchet tension and increase risk. The danger die provides that. Roll the danger die when the PCs move between point crawl nodes, enter certain areas, or rest in a dangerous place. And so the danger die is 1d6, and the results can be, well, I'll just run through them quite quickly. An encounter, which increases the tension stat by 1, and I will explain why that's important in a minute. It can be, there are sometimes if you're in a dangerous area, it means an encounter with a hostile, or you get a clue or something useful in the environment. It can just be stress as you're traveling. Tension goes up by 1. It can deplete your resources and stuff. It uses supply dice for ammo and fuel and things. And on a 6, tension explodes. So what that means then is that as the tension has been going up, maxes out at 6 normally, suddenly all of that tension converts into damage. Your PCs lose a load of their hit points, which don't represent physical harm. It's one of those systems where when you get to 0, you start losing stats and doing critical survival rolls. So that's the danger of tension getting too high, is that while you're traveling, someone freaks out, someone pushes someone else too far with the increasingly unfriendly banter. But the irony is you want tension, because the higher your tension gets, the more benefits you get. Like at tension 1...
I was about to say, you're probably more effective in combat.
Exactly.
Right?
Like it goes you start getting bonuses to damage, advantages on your saves, advantage on initiative. If you get all the way up to tension 6, you are at the frostiness level labeled ice cold, and you get an extra action every round. So you're constantly in this position to add a character, you're tense because you're thinking, well, this is great. I'm really good at fighting stuff right now. But you know that next time you go somewhere, this could all backfire.
I love
and
it.
if you are, in fact, if you're forced to reduce your HP below 0 by a tension explodes thing, you have to roll on the going apeshit table on page 26, which has all kinds of bad effects, including my favorite one, which is where you, Predator style, that's the third film I think of, strip off all your armor and weapons and attempt to take on the enemy in purely hand-to-hand combat, because that's a thing. I think that gives the vibe of the game. It's more grounded than Slipgate Chokepoint is, in that it's sort of set in this tough guys doing difficult combat missions genre, yet at the same time it's a little bit of campness in the way it approaches its source material. But that's the killer app, is tension plus the danger die. That's the thing that really sets Stay Frosty apart from just a point crawl.
I love that. Yeah, those mechanical bits that you mentioned, the tension, the danger die, seems like a really good example of using mechanics to emulate genre. And that is vanishingly rare in the OSR, so that's really intriguing. And so, I find that very exciting. That's cool. Let's go to the Chain Lightning round. Tom.
I enjoy the over-the-top yet apparently meaningless industry at work in the corpse grinding facility. And I quote, "The channel at the back contains a boiling river of blood flowing from west to east through 2 grated apertures. Down into this, at regular intervals, slam 3 enormous square stone pillars from the ceiling at high speeds."
Of the acid vats, the wooden door to this room is huge, thick, and banded with iron struts. Stretched across the outside of it is a horrific mass of skinned human faces in varying states of decay, stitched into a horrifying tapestry. Astute observers might recognize a scientist from the excursion, but there is no trace of brain matter here.
Elsewhere in the complex, some of the keyboards and monitors appear to be leaking blood, and 3 vacuum tubes swirl with blue energies, resembling a screaming face.
Of an encounter in the ceremonial room, 30 feet above, descending from a large circular aperture in the ceiling, is a slowly squirming orb of eyeless flesh around the size of a bull. Clutched in one of its squirming tentacles is the silver key, which is used to access a portcullis to the Death Lord's lair. That's some video game That's stuff right there.
Another shout out then from me for the Death Lord illustration. It's repeated on the back cover in high contrast red and black, and I would say deservedly so.
Mm-hmm. Finally, I like that one of the monsters is called Rottweiler. I assume they are rotten in some way.
They're basically zombie dogs, yeah.
Zombie dogs. Love a zombie dog. Let's go to the next segment. Hi, listeners. Jason here. If you're enjoying this podcast, you should support it and everything we do in the Gauntlet by joining us on Patreon. We have 3 pledge tiers available for new supporters in 2024. The $2 pledge is a great way of saying thank you for everything we do, and it goes a long way toward helping us make this show. You also get some perks on our Discord, such as a special name badge showing you're on the team, and access to Patreon-exclusive channels. At $7, you get early access to Gauntlet publications, as well as access to a number of exclusive releases. In recent weeks, the $7 feed has featured Cut to Christmas, a new mystery for public access, Places in the Wild, which are standalone adventure sets for Trophy Gold, Sweet Jolly Crunch Tooth, a new playbook for the Silt vs. role-playing game, Squatcher Step, a new mystery for Brindlewood Bay, and much more. And we have a ton of new releases heading to the feed in 2024, including brand new games, and scenarios and support material for existing games. Finally, at the $10 level, in addition to all the aforementioned stuff, you will receive a monthly invite to a special 2-hour coffee chat hosted by me, where you and other $10 patrons can chat about the games you're running, talk about game design, and just generally hang out with a fine group of like-minded people. So head over to patreon.com/gauntlet and pledge today. If you can't pledge to Patreon right now, there are other ways of helping us out, such as leaving a 5-star review on this podcast or on one of our Drive-Thru RPG pages. No matter how you help us, please know that we appreciate it and we're delighted you've decided to go on this journey with us. Take care. Our next segment is the Expert Delve, and I have to say I've already looked at the notes, Tom, and I'm very excited by this because this is essentially my entire philosophy of game design and gameplay, but from a different angle, from a totally different angle, so that's pretty great. Iconic art in play. Give us the pitch here, Tom.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is artwork like the maps that come with this adventure, the Flayed Domain, or that you can get in a freely downloadable PDF map pack. Also, I was thinking about the NPC portraits from Vampire the Masquerade Chicago by Night, which I realised I talked to our guest Yeppe about, but not to you about, I don't think.
No.
And these are both cases where something is iconic, not in the sense of the Statue of Liberty is iconic, but in the sense of representing something and is symbolic in a readily identifiable way. Like
a literal icon.
Yeah, the icons on your phone or on a Windows desktop or something.
Yeah.
For example, if we talk about the map pack that's from, it's got, I think the official download title is Stay Frosty Map Pack 0, and it has an intro note saying, these maps do not adhere to a particular scale and are not battle maps. They should be considered abstracted aids. What I did when I ran the scenario was I had them printed out on A4 sheets. Each one is done in this blocky, pixely style and has a classic 90s computer game font with the name of the room written in big capital letters underneath. And I would put it down on the table facing the players as they entered each new thing. And I found that what this did was it created a sense of excitement and discovery and achievement whenever a new one was placed on the table, and also enabled all of us to very easily recall which place was which I think, as we all know, once you're about 3 rooms into a dungeon, often immediately becomes very difficult. I noticed this happening, and I remembered it also being useful when playing Vampire. Maybe we'll leave the NPC part aside. But do you kind of encounter a similar thing where you can have it's not exactly a handout, because it's not really there to be looked at or messed with, but something designed to cause a visual imprint on someone's memory as soon as they see it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's something that I actively use in my own gaming, mostly just because of the style of games I normally run. But when I'm doing a fantasy adventure thing, I'm usually doing Trophy Gold, and that does have the visual diagrams of the incursions where it's name, box, name of set, arrow connecting to next box. And I do often make that available, or often my players are at least aware of it. And it has an interesting effect where there's something really interesting that happens when players at a player level, not a character level, understand what's coming, or they can orient themselves in time and space. I think it changes, and I would say improves the gameplay quite a lot, because players are able to have information in their head that only they have, that their characters don't have, and that's okay. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I wouldn't say it's something that I don't do very often. For Brindlewood Bay, we're making these cards with pictures of all the suspects. And the idea here is you lay out all the suspect cards, and even if you haven't met those individual suspects yet, players just seeing the icon of the suspect, like laying down on the table, it helps them know that that's somebody they can go talk to. That's somebody who might be important.
Yeah, it's like having the list of characters at the beginning of a mystery novel, right? You know which ones are relevant.
That's exactly right. Similar idea, I think.
Yeah. I think, did we discuss that in some Call of Cthulhu scenario episode years ago, maybe? Because I did do that for my game City of Light has that, especially between sessions, maybe if there's a long gap. I'll share the list of NPCs so that they know, the players can just keep track of not who they've met necessarily, but who's important. And you're right, for NPCs, it's really valuable as well. Vampire the Masquerade had a great thing of it, had that sort of black and white style of these little rectangular portraits it would always use for its NPC diagrams. And there, I think, what was important was they weren't necessarily the best pictures, but each one of them was readily differentiated from the next. It was quite hard to confuse two NPCs, even though they were all in black and white and about half an inch tall. Yeah. You could spot them a mile off. That, I think, is quite important when you're choosing which things to use, you know?
Well, so you've got these map pack elements from Stay Frosty. You've got the idea of the Vampire the Masquerade portraits. These are not maps. They're not even really handouts. They're just little icons to put on the table. What would you say is the impact of that? How does that affect players? Because I think that's what we're getting at here, is how it affects play.
First of all, it is a shared anchor for both memory and imagination, which, you know, is good for navigating the scenario, especially in a longer scenario, actually. Yeah. That wasn't maybe the key when running the Flayed Domain because it was just a one-shot, but as soon as you get beyond 2 or 3 sessions, that does become pretty vital. Instead of just everyone going, you remember that guy, the one we met with the limp? Was he the one with the limp? I don't know, that kind of thing. You don't want that. It also shows you, as you mentioned, what's important. I think it gives you a sense of achievement when you meet a new one gets unveiled. You're like, hey, here's someone you've met. Here's a new place you've been. Yeah, that's great. But I also think, as we sort of alluded to, is the non-diegetic nature of it. When I put down a map from the Flayed Domain, it says underneath it, the acid vats. Now, the player characters don't know that this room is called the acid vats in capital letters. Maybe we're playing this in the past tense, and this is what the characters who survive will refer to it as later. But that, I would say, is similar. Sometimes in a movie, particularly perhaps a latter-day Western, a new character walks on and you get their character name along the bottom of the screen. Oh, the Romeo and Juliet does that, the 90s one by Baz Luhrmann.
Oh, yeah.
And that's great. No one's seeing that in character.
Right, yeah.
But it's still great. So it has that effect. It tells you who's a big deal. Oh, no, that's not true. It can be done for minor characters as well. It's just sort of, it gives you this sort of little intro, a little pop of interest. Here's a new thing to play with. And you're right, I think that sort of dramatic irony where you know something your character doesn't. I'm not sure why that enhances the game, but it definitely did. Like whenever I unveiled these things, the players were so into it. It was great.
I'm going to do some real old religion here in terms of like Gauntlet podcast talk. I find that the most difficult aspect of our hobby is the fact that you have to get 4, 5, if you're insane, maybe 6 people around the table to get their individual headspaces united in some way, right? Like you have to achieve some level of cohesion. You have to get your individual headcanons synced up. And anything you can do that can minimize that friction, I think is the better. The absolute worst sessions I've ever been a player in is when the GM is essentially expecting us to guess what's going on. We're just sitting there at the table and we're just meant to guess, and we have no context to understand to make such a guess. Yeah. And furthermore, we all have in our minds different ideas of what's happening. You'll see this a lot in mystery-based scenarios, incidentally. Yeah. And then you add the extra layer of the GM has very, very extensive particularized knowledge, especially if they're operating off a module. And it can be a real disconnect, and it just adds friction at the table. I'll go even further. This is why many, many role-playing games devolve into just being the GM delivering story to the players, and the players just rolling dice and reacting, because they are not invited into that space. The GM does not provide any way of melding your disparate brains. And so this idea of iconic play this idea of putting things down on the table that helps minimize that. And like, I love that phrase you used. You said it very quickly, but shared anchors for memory and imagination. What a terrific phrase, because that's exactly what we're doing here. The reason why it makes it better is because everybody at the table has something they can grab onto and start to like achieve some shared sense of things. Now, in my own game design, in my own games, I don't use visual representations like that. I try to achieve this in other ways, but it's the same idea. It's this idea that the player characters know things and the players know things. And those are two distinct sets of information, and that's okay. In fact, it's often really, really good, and it eases play if the players know many more things than the player characters do. I can already hear the my immersion people like out there going crazy listening to this. You know what? Your immersion was broken when Joe had to get up and go get another bag of Doritos, okay? Like, sorry. You know, like your like fabled immersion is, in my opinion, way overrated. When players know things that the characters don't know, it just eases play in a huge way.
That's true. It's very interesting, that you mentioned that split between what the characters know and obviously the players in real life, they'll know many more things because they're real people. But there are many things that the player characters can see and perceive within the world, presumably, that the players cannot. Two things that are really important for this iconic use of resources, be it a map, be it a picture of something, or even if you're not doing visual representation, just the way you describe characters or places. And that is simplicity and stickiness in the technical terms. But the simplicity, I think, is important. So to harp on about vampire pictures from 30 years ago, there are many pictures of the famous NPCs that are in all these old classic scenario books by White Wolf. Many of them are, for example, like oil paintings. They're incredibly well rendered and detailed, and they look amazing. They're like different alternative takes on the same character, but they're still recognizably that person. And yet, when I think about the character Tyler in Chicago, I do not think of any of the very excellent paintings of her that have been done. I think of that one black and white image. And I think it's crucial that when you're describing an NPC, you just have one or two, or maybe actually one or two things that are simple but unique to that character, because the players do not need to, for example, know what the back of Tyler's head looks like. They're only ever going to see her face in that one sketch, but they need to remember that one thing about her so that it can hook onto that, and the rest of remembering stuff will happen thereafter. And for that reason, I think that can apply to the form of an image. I don't think you should use really detailed color pictures of NPCs or anything in games as visual references, especially if you get to the point where they start to be hard to tell apart.
That's fair. Yeah. I was going to say it may depend on the game you're playing and the situation, but I get that. It's really interesting. I think the broader conversation here of the utility of devices like this at the table is just so intriguing. And my mind keeps going back to this idea of what players know, what player characters know, and that division and how that can inform how we make utilities, how we make things usable at the table and how we do it. And it's a topic that's way beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But I love it. And I've never really thought about it in visual terms. I guess I kind of have, because I'm one of those GMs, even in a fantasy adventure game, I share the map, right?
Right, yeah.
like I share the map with the players. If I can get a map without the secret doors labeled, I'll use that if I can. But in general, I share the map. And it's because I would rather not spend 10 minutes trying to describe the particular angle of a 50-foot corridor or the dimensions of a room and whether something is north and south and east and west. I would rather not do that and just put the map down on the table and say, here's the map. Obviously your characters can't see all this, but you can as a player. We have now eliminated the talk of what does this space look like. Now let's just talk about what your characters are doing as they enter that room. I just think that's more interesting.
There are some people that now swear by that kind of caller and mapper structure of dungeoneering. One day I will try it. It does sound intriguing, but I don't know. I don't really know how to do it.
I've never had a good experience with it. Yeah. And I believe that there are probably play groups who have been playing together for decades who they have their position in the party, and I'm always the one who draws the maps and I know what I'm doing and I know how to communicate. And that's great. I love that for them. That's so cool. You get a random group of 4 people together and you tell one of them at a convention, you tell one of them you're the map maker, you're fucking done. I'm sorry. That's just not going to go anywhere. I'm not here to harsh the way people try to have fun. Play the games however you want to play them. I'm like, whatever, if it's working for you, then do it. I'm just saying that I agree with this idea of a visual way of eliminating friction at the table so that we can just focus on what the characters are doing, I think is really good.
Yes. Excellent conclusion. Sure, I had a second bit. Oh yeah, the second bit of my claims about how to do is, are you familiar with the term stickiness as it is used in marketing and the like? It's an annoying term,
I guess
I would
not,
say.
no. Yeah.
It's this
it
idea
does sound
of
very marketing, though.
Yes,
yeah.
It's this idea of sort of things that will stick in your memory, like an annoying jingle.
Mm-hmm.
And the principle here is that it doesn't have to be like actually good or pleasant, as long as it sticks in the memory. And so one of the techniques that is often used, like obviously I'm sort of on the writing side of things, but it works the graphics a little bit as well, is you do something that seems a little bit wrong, because that then pops out and stays in the memory. So there's a famous example is the Apple slogan, think different. Technically, it should be think differently. And it's like a minor grammatical thing that in the 80s was more of a big deal. Or I'll give an example, I think, from the Flayed Domain maps, which is that because the maps are all built with these sort of sprite blocks, like in a video game, they're all on the same scale. And therefore, there's also a limit on how small they can be. Like, they can be 1 square. That's the smallest thing you can do. When you get to the void room or the ceremonial room, they're a lot smaller than the other ones. So they're actually floating in what appears to be way too much white space compared to the larger chambers. And the void room is a little bit off-center. It's like on the top left of the page. And the ceremonial room is not. Now, from an aesthetic point of view, you might say, well, this is not good. Mm-hmm. The proportions of this are displeasing to me, and I think this could be done better. But this, I think, is quite deliberate, because then unconsciously you remember the void room. It's not just the thing that's basically a big black square with some lumps in it. It's also the one that was weirdly off-center and surrounded by acres of white space. It sort of separates it from all the other things. And so that's something you can do. By the way, this isn't a call to GMs to make loads of really irritating NPCs, but you can give characters things that don't seem to quite fit, and that on your first instinct is, oh, I won't do that. That would be a bit annoying, or it doesn't quite match what the character's meant to be. But actually, you should reconsider that, because something that doesn't quite fit is what makes something stick in the memory. And that is stickiness. Okay. And like I say, it's an annoying term, but it is practical.
That's really insightful, because as you explain it here, I understand the concept. It makes perfect sense, but I think it's something that I probably wasn't really aware of. Yeah. It's intriguing to think about that.
Secrets of
the role-playing game. The role-playing game implementations there. That's pretty cool. Okay. Anything else you want to say about this?
I think we've covered it as much as we are able to on this occasion, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Indeed. Let's go to the next segment. Okay, companion adventures. We've both got a film, we've both got music, so let's do that. What's your film?
My film is Doom from 2005, the video game adaptation. I would say it's definitely one of the best video game to movie adaptations ever made. 4 out of 10.
I'm choosing Edge of Tomorrow, the 2014 Tom Cruise classic. In my opinion, a much underappreciated movie.
I think you're right. When I first watched it, I bounced off it a bit, but then I happened to sort of, I don't know, just Netflix it without thinking. It's pretty good, isn't it?
It's really good. Yeah, it's really, really good. Yeah, and the reason why I picked it is because, well, it's Space Marines, but also
it's video gamey.
Yeah, it's got a very video game structure. It's a great spiritual companion adventure, I would say, to this. How about music?
So for music, obviously you could just go back to all the soundtracks for these classic 90s games, Doom, Quake. What else was there? Hexen, the one where you're a wizard? I don't know. But the one I've chosen is Fear Factory's album Obsolete from 1998, because this is, I think it's bang in the period of these games, and I think it fulfills all of the vibes you need for the Flayed Domain. It's technically industrial metal, lots of lyrics about machines and things being horrible. I think it's technically a sort of pseudo concept album, but don't worry too much about that. Is it the best album ever done? No, but it's got some catchy bits, and it's definitely in genre for Slipgate Choke Point.
Love it. My music recommendation, I know that this wants heavy metal because of Doom, but I don't listen to heavy metal music, and so I am instead going to give you some dark synthwave from one of my favorite artists, Carl Casey. I got 2 tracks for you here. These are very high energy, metal-ish, I would say, tracks that would be great in a firefight. The System Has Failed and Videodrome. And with all that, listeners, Fear of a Black Dragon is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. Our website is gauntlet-rpg.com or brindlewoodbay.com. We have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. You can always go support the show there. Hey, maybe you're not able to support the show financially. That's okay. Please go give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That will help us a lot. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you, of course, to our interdimensional editor, Ridge Rogers. And thank you, listeners, for listening. Take care.
Take care.